Flooding in Alaska is a multifaceted and increasingly serious environmental challenge, driven by a unique confluence of climatic, geological, and atmospheric factors. While floods are a natural occurrence, climate change has dramatically altered their frequency, intensity, and nature, particularly impacting remote Alaska Native communities, where traditional livelihoods and infrastructure are at grave risk. This detailed overview explores the various types of flooding in Alaska, examines recent devastating events, and outlines the projected future risks. Alaskan flooding is not a monolithic phenomenon but arises from several distinct mechanisms, often interacting with one another. The western coast of Alaska, bordering the Bering Sea, is particularly susceptible to coastal flooding from the remnants of Pacific typhoons, like the recent Typhoon Halong in October 2025. These storms, though weakened, still carry immense energy, producing powerful storm surges and high winds that push water far inland, overwhelming coastal villages. A critical factor exacerbating coastal flooding is the rapid and continuous decline of Arctic sea ice. The absence of sea ice during the open water season, especially fall, allows storms to build greater energy and generate larger waves, increased fetch, which then pound exposed coastlines, leading to severe erosion and inundation. The combination of storm surge, wave run-up, and sea level rise creates a devastating compound effect. For many coastal communities, particularly those on the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, this results in water pushing homes off their foundations and completely submerging vital infrastructure. As Alaska's glaciers melt at an accelerated pace due to human-induced climate change, they can form lakes in depressions left by the retreating ice. These lakes are often dammed by unstable ice or moraines, sediment and rock debris. When the ice dam fails under immense water pressure, or the moraine dam erodes, the lake can drain catastrophically and without warning, sending a massive, destructive wall of water downstream. A prime example of this phenomenon is the annual flooding in Juneau caused by gloughs from Suicide Basin on the Mendenhall Glacier. The basin, now filled with meltwater due to the glacier's retreat, has been producing annual outburst floods since 2011. These events have repeatedly broken flood records, destroying homes and straining the local infrastructure. Gloughs are particularly destructive because the floodwaters pick up large amounts of sediment and boulders as they rush down the valley, transforming into a thick, powerful slurry capable of leveling buildings. In Alaska's interior, severe flooding is often triggered by river ice jams during spring breakup. As rivers thaw, large chunks of ice can pile up and block the natural flow of water, causing a sudden and rapid increase in the water level upstream. The pressure can cause the ice dam to break violently, sending a destructive flood pulse downstream. Ice jams on major rivers like the Yukon can have significant consequences for communities that rely on the river for transportation and subsistence. While historical records exist, climate change is altering the timing and nature of breakup, introducing new uncertainties.
Kipnuk,
The thawing of permafrost, permanently frozen ground that underlies much of Alaska, is a major contributing factor to flooding and erosion. As ice-rich permafrost thaws, the ground becomes unstable and can collapse or subside, a process known as thermokarst. This destabilization directly threatens the integrity of infrastructure, including roads, buildings, and pipelines. Along Alaska's Arctic coast, permafrost thaw exacerbates coastal erosion, which has been rapidly increasing since the early 2000s. This process, combined with the loss of protective sea ice, is causing coastlines to recede at an alarming rate. Thawing permafrost also alters local hydrology, creating a wet landscape with rapid runoff that can increase the severity of local flooding events.
Head home.
Remnants of Typhoon Halong slammed into the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, causing record-setting coastal flooding. The storm surge pushed water up to 6.6 feet above the normal high tide in some areas, shattering previous records. The event displaced hundreds of people in communities like Kipnuk and Kwigillingok, damaged dozens of airports and roads, and resulted in at least one fatality. Flooding in Alaska is a growing crisis, directly linked to the rapid and profound effects of climate change. From coastal surges driven by stronger storms and less sea ice, to the unpredictable and destructive power of glacial lake outbursts, to the insidious ground instability caused by permafrost thaw, the threats are multiplying. Recent events, like the devastating floods from Typhoon Halong and the repeated gloughs in Juneau, serve as a stark warning of what is to come. For Alaska's vulnerable communities and critical infrastructure, understanding these complex flooding mechanisms is the first step toward building resilience and navigating an uncertain future. The storm surge in Kipnuk was measured at 6.6 feet above the highest normal tide line, a record-breaking level that overwhelmed the village's low-lying coastal defenses. The floodwaters lifted homes off their foundations, carrying some away with residents still inside. Initial reports indicated at least 8 homes were swept from their foundations, and by October 17th, officials had confirmed 121 homes destroyed in Kipnuk alone. The unprecedented flooding triggered a massive search and rescue operation involving the U.S. Coast Guard and the Alaska Air National Guard. Dozens of people were rescued from the rising floodwaters and displaced from their homes, with many taking temporary shelter in the community school. The timing of the storm, just before the onset of the brutal Alaskan winter, significantly complicates recovery efforts. With winter approaching, rebuilding is logistically difficult and expensive, as almost all construction materials must be flown or shipped in. The devastation in Kipnuk is not merely the result of a single extreme storm, but is rooted in a combination of long-term environmental factors amplified by climate change. Historically, a protective barrier of sea ice would form in the fall, shielding the coastline from storm surges and wave erosion. With climate change, this sea ice is forming later and is thinner, leaving Kipnuk's low-lying coastline exposed to the full force of storms. The village is built on permafrost, a layer of perpetually frozen ground. As global temperatures rise, the permafrost is thawing, causing the ground to become unstable and subside. This leads to the collapse of riverbanks, threatening the village's infrastructure and increasing its vulnerability to erosion and flooding. The floods in Kipnuk, particularly the catastrophic event in October 2025, offer a vivid illustration of the severe climate impacts facing western Alaska. The combination of warmer oceans, vanishing sea ice, and thawing permafrost has created a perfect storm of environmental instability, threatening the homes, safety, and cultural heritage of remote indigenous communities. As the world grapples with the global effects of climate change, the story of Kipnuk serves as a critical and urgent reminder of the real costs of inaction, placing vulnerable communities on the front lines of an accelerating environmental crisis. As the weakened but still powerful storm system moved into the Bering Sea, it generated a record-breaking storm surge that hammered the coastline of the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. In the hard-hit areas, including neighboring communities like Kipnuk and Kwigillingok, water levels rose by more than 6 feet above normal high tides, easily overwhelming natural and human-made defenses. While Nightmute is a small village with a population of approximately 300, the flood's impact was outsized. Eyewitness accounts and reports from the Alaskan National Guard described floodwaters lifting homes and carrying them away, leaving behind debris and desolation. The ferocity of the flood caught many off guard, despite prior warnings, as the combination of high winds and a massive wave field proved too much for the vulnerable coastline. Rescue crews, braving dangerous winds and churning floodwaters, responded to calls for help from residents trapped in their homes or clinging to structures. While initial search efforts confirmed no deaths in Nightmute, the sheer chaos of the storm left the community deeply shaken. More than 1,500 people were ultimately displaced across the region, with hundreds from communities like Nightmute, Kipnuk, and Kwagilingok evacuated to safer shelters in regional hubs like Bethel and Anchorage. Many were forced to take refuge in the village's school or other public buildings until airlifts could begin. The devastation in Nightmute is not a random act of nature, but a consequence of escalating climate impacts. The remnants of Typhoon Halong were a supercharged storm, retaining immense energy from unusually warm Pacific Ocean surface temperatures. This, combined with several long-term environmental factors, created a perfect storm for disaster. The historical practice of coastal communities in this region was to rely on the formation of autumn sea ice to protect against powerful fall storms. With Arctic sea ice disappearing and forming later in the season, Nightmute's coastline was left exposed to the full, unimpeded force of the ocean. The absence of this protective buffer allowed for a much larger and more destructive storm surge. Nightmute, like much of the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, is built on permafrost. As this frozen ground thaws due to rising temperatures, it becomes unstable and subsides or sinks. According to Rick Thoman, a climate specialist at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, this subsidence essentially lowers the village's elevation, making it more vulnerable to flooding with every inch of rising sea level. The combination of permafrost thaw, subsidence, and increased wave action from open water has accelerated coastal erosion along the delta. This process is actively eating away at the very ground on which communities like Nightmute are built, further increasing their vulnerability to flooding. The flood in Nightmute is a poignant and powerful illustration of the climate crisis in action. It is not an isolated incident but part of a larger pattern of climate-fueled destruction affecting vulnerable coastal communities across western Alaska. The devastation left by Typhoon Halong's remnants serves as a chilling harbinger of a future where extreme weather events become the norm, forcing these communities to confront the painful choices between protecting their traditions and adapting to an increasingly hostile environment. As the global climate continues to warm, the lessons learned from Nightmute's struggle will become all the more critical.